Ah yes, every indie dev's favorite moment, the part where people play their game. That is sarcasm, in case you didn't pick up on that. Well, half sarcasm at least. See, obviously most game developers actually want people to play their games. There are some base chads in the world who make games purely for themselves with no intention of sharing their creations except maybe among a small group of friends, but the rest of us do legitimately want people to play our stuff. But actually putting the game in front of people and watching them play is honestly one of the most nerve-wracking parts of being a game dev, especially if you're insane and solo developed your game. And I'm not even talking about when you release the finished game. Oh no. I'm referring to just doing a private playtest, where a small handful of friends and even complete strangers play your game. Playing your own game is good, of course, but at some point somebody else needs to try it out, and then I, as a developer, need to get their feedback and apply it. So this past month I sent a build out to a handful of kind folks and got some of that delicious feedback. And how has that gone? Well, that's what the rest of the video is for, isn't it? My name is Lance, aka Infinite Level, and I'm making a psychological horror game titled What Hides in Dreams, where death leaves scars. This month's devlog is all about seeking and applying feedback. The first order of business when doing a playtest is to, well, find playtesters. Historically, I've relied a lot on my dear wife to playtest games for me. In fact, she's playtested all my previous games because she's the best. This time, however, she has opted not to playtest What Hides in Dreams due to it being a horror game, and she does not particularly like being scared. So I've had to look elsewhere for playtesting. Thankfully, I've got a group of fellow gamer friends that I can send out calls to. Although, this process has taught me that a lot of my friends are chickens who also don't like getting scared. I still love them though. Still, I got a few friends to try, and even a couple people who don't normally do horror gave the game a spin, which I greatly appreciate. Even within this small selection of people, the focus that each one has can certainly vary. Some look at more the QA side of things, like making sure the settings menu has all necessary options and that the game doesn't, blow up. Others focus a bit more on the feeling of progression. Of course, this being a horror game, lots of attention is put on how scary it is, though, as established, my friends are chickens, so I naturally got a lot of responses saying that this was indeed scary. I did also happen to get a total stranger to play this game too, which is obviously great for feedback purposes. After all, the potential downside of having friends and family play your game is they are automatically inclined to encourage you and tell you you're doing good because bias. That's of course awesome for my ego, but I need me some honesty. Still, over the years I have found friends and family are generally pretty honest with me. I genuinely think if they thought the game sucked, they would tell me without sugarcoating it. In fact, I know they would, because they have, but that's a story for another day. So let's start with the most common feedback I received. It's too dark. Now, some of you might hear that and think, well yes, it's a horror game, what were they expecting? But there is such a thing as too dark in horror media. I mean, think about it, does wandering around aimlessly in the dark sound fun to you? However, this was almost always coupled with another common complaint, that being that players simply didn't know where to go. And to be honest, I think that's the real issue here. It wasn't until this lack of direction was pointed out to me that I realized that almost every level in this game gives you no direction whatsoever. I think the design philosophy of my previous game, a Metroidvania, accidentally made its way into What Hides in Dreams. I would just plot players into a level and expect them to piece together the rest from there. The difference, however, is that in a Metroidvania, there is an agreement made between the game and the player that states that obstacles are overcome through exploration and eventual new powers, which makes feeling lost a bit more fun. Plus, you can blast penguins with missiles as you explore. A first-person psychological horror game with very little combat needs to give the player a bit more guidance, which I know sounds like hand-holding, and that's because it is. The trick is to make it not feel like hand-holding. With that in mind, I've been going through the game's levels and adding in new horror events and effects to inform players what their end goal is in the given level, and then letting them run wild after that. I, as a developer, am then trusting that you, the player, can figure out what to do beyond that point. And thankfully, the feedback I received did state that players were able to eventually clear the levels, even if it took them longer than it really should have. This further reinforces my theory that the issue is that players don't really know what the end goal is. So, I think these changes will do a lot to help that issue, and possibly without even having to adjust the game's brightness. Another important piece of feedback was the length of story notes, as well as considering the possibility of some kind of dyslexia mode. Something I had given a little thought but had largely ignored. In some video footage I received of someone's playtest, it was not uncommon for this player to find a story note, see its length, and go, ugh, which is, not a great reaction. If I didn't care what people thought of the story, I might be more willing to ignore this, but unfortunately, I care quite a bit, and want people to enjoy discovering bits and pieces of the story as they play. In fact, the whole Death Leaves Scars premise kind of relies on players caring at least a little about the story and the way it changes in response to certain outcomes. Now, I understand that putting all the story in story notes is a bit of an issue in and of itself, as some people just really hate reading in video games, but in case I've not made it clear in this devlog series, I don't have money to throw at this game. Believe me, if I did, I'd be outsourcing all kinds of stuff. Alas, I cannot pay people, for I am Poe. And that means I'm kind of stuck with the story notes, so I need to do my best to get people to actually want to read these things. The problem, it seemed, was that the notes are too long. They take a while to read, and the game doesn't pause, so if a monster is prowling about, you can't exactly focus on the note. This is still being worked on, but I've at least begun by shortening almost all the story notes, attempting to condense them down so that the same idea is communicated as before, but with far fewer words. Kinda like the reverse of what a high school English teacher would ask for. That same playtester also noted that he has dyslexia, so I've begun putting in work into a setting which changes the game's font choices to something more dyslexic friendly. So far, this new setting applies to the reading mode on story notes and the settings menu itself. During my research, I found this font called Open Dyslexic that seems to be well liked, but feel free to leave some pointers about dyslexic friendly fonts in the comments. I am not a dyslexic person, so I could use all the guidance I can get on this. Of course, it wouldn't be playtesting without some bug reports. There were some of the usual suspects like bad performance or the player getting stuck on things, but then you have real crazy stuff like the text of a riddle not loading or sound effects from a single level being present throughout the game. Needless to say, I've gotten a long list of bugs and issues to fix on top of the long list I already had. Polishing and bug fixing truly is the never-ending story in game dev, it seems. My favorite bug comes from the old house level. A playtester discovered that if they pick up the knife and walk up to a certain concrete wall and slash at it, they'll kill the monster without the monster ever needing to spawn. Why did they decide to do this? Who knows, but thanks for letting me know. The reason this works is the area behind the concrete wall is where I kept the monster until it was time to spawn them in. Oh, yeah, the monsters are always present, by the way. I hide them in the walls until it's time for them to come out and play. By slashing the knife at this spot, the knife collider would hit the monster and trigger the monster death outcome. Killing the monster before they've even spawned in throws the entire level sequence out of whack, resulting in certain horror events that continue to follow the player everywhere, leftover sounds that don't go away, and of course, a very befuddled player. I think the prison and the old house levels in particular had the most issues, which is a little surprising since those are some of the older levels in the game, but hey, this is why we playtest. Beyond finding problems to fix, I also wanted to take this chance to decide on which levels to include in the game's demo. I constructed this form to help gather feedback on this game, and among the form's questions was a section where players ranked the levels. The playtesters, well, they didn't really use it, and instead sent all their feedback through Discord, which is fine, but, you know, I spent a whole evening putting this together. But between the singular response on this forum and the messages received through Discord, the favorite levels have turned out to be almost exactly what I expected. The old house and castle levels were universally agreed upon to be the best, which makes sense as they were the first two levels to be made. The trouble I find myself in is I don't want to front load the demo with all the best levels, not to mention it'll really trigger my OCD if I have all the demo levels be upstairs and not have any on the main floor. I think I'm pretty confident about including the old house level in the demo, but while it might seem like the logical next step to include the castle level, I think I'd rather save that one for the full game. But the prison level had a mixed reception, and I personally have had my doubts about it too, and the library is definitely not ready. That leaves the office, which certainly has its issues to solve before the demo release, but I do think it would balance out the types of levels to be included in the demo. I'll definitely think on it at least, but there's a lot of directions to take this, including working on a brand new level entirely, focusing a ton of attention on it, and then including that level with the demo. Decisions. In the time since that round of playtesting and now, I've made some attempts to fix most of these problems, and then some. Player direction and performance fixes have been the main two focuses, and a lot of progress has been made in those regards. There's still a lot to tackle from this playtest though, so sadly I can't rest easy yet. I've also begun crafting a new level in case I do decide to go with a different level for the demo altogether. Whether I include it or not is another thing, but either way, it's been a nice change of pace after spending the last few months doing almost nothing but polishing the heck out of this game. And of course, creating an entirely new level will make for some good devlog material. So if you're curious to see what that process looks like, I highly recommend you subscribe to the channel for future devlogs. Likes are appreciated if you did indeed like it, and hey, if you disliked this, then you are free to tell me that too. Most importantly, if What Hides in Dreams looks interesting to you, then I would love it if you took the time to wishlist the game on Steam. Wishlisting plays a major role in helping Steam gauge interest in a game and can eventually help the game get in front of more people who might be interested in What Hides in Dreams. Plus, once it does release, you'll get a notification letting you know. No constant guessing and speculating necessary. Link is in the description below. Thanks for watching, have a pleasant day or night, and until next time.